solid Caro-Kann defense, that's 1e4 c6, causes particular difficulty to a lot of 1e4 players who feel quite unable to breach black's defences, or don't even know the best way to go about it. They try a lot of the main lines and simply run aground against black's very solid setup. So we need something new, we need something fresh. Allow me to introduce knight e2. We're going to see a whole bunch of recent games, mostly from Grandmaster level, certainly from Master level, where this move was successful. It's a unnatural looking move, but it certainly adds an original twist to the usual Caro-Kann fare. And we're going to start off with a game from the Calcutta Open, which was played in September 2009, played between Grandmaster Nigel Short from England, a very creative and aggressive player who is experiencing something of a renaissance in his form in 2009, and he's playing Michael Machedlishvili, who's graded over 2600, so no mean opponent. The first point to notice about knight e2 is that white intends to play e5 after d5. The knight on e2 looks somewhat unnaturally placed, but it does have the merit after c5 of defending the d4 square. We'll see in subsequent games that white can also play the outlandish move b4 in this position, which is also very interesting. But for the time being, let's stick with d4, and we note that if black takes on d4, he somehow solves white's problem of the knight. The knight takes on d4, and white has slightly the better game thanks to the space gaining influence of the pawn on e5. So black normally sticks with knight c6 here, and white plays c3. C takes d4, c takes d4, and now bishop g4. So very standard play in the Caro-Kann. Black often has problems in the Caro-Kann with his queen's bishop, not necessarily getting it developed, but developing it to an influential square. Here the bishop pins the knight. f3 is a kind of ugly move for white, although Short actually plays it a little bit later on. So, you know, I think this is very logical. Black can also play bishop f5 in this position. But let's just note how Short tackles this. He develops his pieces. Black plays e6, and now comes bishop e3. So, very normal play. And now black plays knight e7, intending knight f5. Short has had particular success over the years with these advanced variation positions. I know he really believes in the cramping effect of the pawn on e5. And now we see him gaining space on the queen side in typical style with f3 and g4, and following up with knight f4. So white has managed to find a very good use for that knight on e2. I would say watch out for the opportunity to improve that knight as early as possible. Well, black plays pawn up to a6, rook c1, covering c2, and now h5, anticipating white's idea of h4, which would certainly force a concession on black's king side. So h5 first, and now white plays bishop g2. Black takes on g4, opening up prospects for the rook on h8, and retreats his bishop to h7. Now white castles. Short is in his element. The f-file is open. Of course, you know, the white king position is a little bit airy, so this is a very double-edged position. But as we'll see, Short has got something extremely aggressive in mind, and after knight g6, he hit out with the excellent piece sacrifice, knight f takes d5. Now, of course, if black captures that knight, white will take back with the bishop, aiming fire at f7. So Machedlishvili decided to play knight h4, a counter-attacking move. White was in no mood to give up his light square bishop, so he retreated to h1, and only now did black capture on d5. So we're going to see the acid test of white's sacrifice. Knight takes d5. It's a full-blooded sacrifice, this one, based on the inability of black to complete his development quickly. White is hoping to get an attack going using his central pawns and his well-placed pieces before black can get his pieces out of the starting blocks. Black moves to cover f7 with bishop g6. And now absolutely superb move, rook takes c6, stripping away the pawn cover around the black king and following up with a further offer, knight f6 check. Well, what is black to play in this position? King e7 looks horrendous. Black bought the offer with g takes f6. In comes the white bishop. Black has to play his king up to e7 anyway, and now short reveals what a dangerous and lethal attacker he can be by playing e takes f6 check. And, well, black's reply is completely forced here, I think. King d6, hoping to run away. But it's out of the frying pan into the fire. Queen a4 now. White is pounding down on the poor old black king with no less than 4 pieces. Well, all his pieces in effect. And black's pieces really are very ineffectual. So black tries to run away. Rook c1. Note that bishop f4 would have been answered by bishop d6. But of course rook c1 sets up deadly discovered checks. Queen d6 was the best that black could find. Bishop takes a8 check, thank you very much. King b8. And now the queen comes into e8 to finish the job. Black resigns. So what a total rout. A tremendous attack by Nigel Short. I doubt Mechedlishvili knew quite what hit him in this game, but it does give you an indication of the potential of this move, knight e2. My next game involving the unusual knight e2 comes from the Gibraltar tournament in 2007 between Ruben Felgeier, Grandmaster graded 2556, and the English female Grandmaster Jovanka Huska, who you'll recall wrote an excellent book on the Caro-Kann Defense, and so should be regarded as something of a leading theoretician in that opening. Well, again we see the contours of d5, e5, and now black must make a choice. Should she play c5, which is the mainline move, or can black continue with the natural move bishop f5 in this position, which is again a very common choice. We will see a game with this move a little later on. But for the time being, let's note that black's task is not at all easy after knight g3. White can also play knight d4, but knight g3 would be my preferred move. This is Nigel Short's choice when he reaches this position. And one idea might be to harass the light square bishop, for instance with h4. If black plays h5 in this position, then white has the interesting move knight e2, which might look like a loss of time, but funnily enough, white's move knight f4 is not at all easy to meet. Going back to knight g3, in the game Short versus Sasi Kiran, played in the Olympiad in the year 2000, black came out with the unusual move bishop e6, and the idea was to blockade on the light squares after d4, g6, c4 and then h5. Quite often the move h5 is useful, jabbing at a knight on g3, but still, you know, I prefer white in this position after bishop d3, queen c8 and now h4. White seems to be slightly better in this position. Somehow he can lever open the position with ideas such as c4 and f4. At any rate, white must try to prepare those moves. We'll see, as I say, bishop f5 a little later on, but back to Felgeier Huska now and the move c5, which, as we know from the last game, can be answered by d4. Alright, well, knight c6 was played, c3, and now black plays bishop to g4. Well, there are other moves in this position, obviously. Let's just drop back. Black can try e6 here, which is kind of like, how can I put it, it's an advanced French with an extra move for white. It's just a question of whether that move knight e2 is a move white really wants to make. My own view is that a move is a move. There should be some way to make use of this. A knight d2 seems the best way, going into a type of Tarrasch position where the knight may be manoeuvred to f3, and if black plays knight f5, white goes a3, and if queen b6, hitting d4 one more time, we can play g4 and then knight f4, when white's pawn on d4 is not really weak and he's got lots of space on the queen side, on the king side, excuse me. So I think this looks decent for white. Going back to the position after c3, black has also tried in this position pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, and now bishop f5. But the problem with pawn takes pawn from black's point of view is that the c3 square has been cleared for a white knight. Therefore, knight c3 is good, and after e6, white can take time out to play a3. If black plays a6, then bishop e3 is a good move, with the idea perhaps of advancing the kingside pawns. h3 might start the process rolling. Well, there's certainly some interesting possibilities here. If h5, e takes f6, knight takes f6, and now g3, as in the game Davis versus Spielman, Southend 1999. Black played bishop d6, bishop g2 happened, rook c8. Black is, developing his pieces okay, but what about those weaknesses in his pawn structure? White was able to castle, knight a5, bishop f4. Of course, the exchange of dark square bishops favours white in this position, thanks to his control over e5. Knight c4, and now queen c1, with the better game for white, due to his positional control over the centre. So, black is being posed new problems at an early stage, and it's not at all easy to solve these problems. At any rate, Huska in this game to play bishop g4, preferring not to take on d4 for the time being. Queen b3. Well, at the time, an innovation by Felgeier, a strange looking move which turns out to be very effective in this game, and a move actually which didn't feature in Huska's book. So far, Huska's following her own recommendation, but Queen b3 is a new idea. Bishop takes e2, bishop takes e2, and now queen d7, attending to white's threat of queen takes b7. Bishop e3, a necessary reinforcement of d4, and after e6, white decided to castle. Knight ge7. You would think in this position the knights were at least the equal of the bishops, but just observe what happens here. Knight comes to d2, knight f5, and now white brings the knight to f3. Bishop e7, and now g4 was played. Well, this is obviously risky, but white wants really a majority of pawns in the centre. This is the main idea behind g4, forcing black's hand. I mean, if white wanted to play it safe in this position, he could play rook a d1 with a slight edge. White has an edge in this position, mainly because of the pawn on e5. The pawn on e5 gives him more space and therefore more opportunity to fashion an advantage. White usually gets the advantage in this position by advancing the kingside pawns at the right moment. It's just that here, Felgeier decides to do this sooner rather than later. And as I say, Huska's hand's completely forced. She's got to take on e3. Well, c4. I don't know that I would have been so keen to block the position here. I think that black needs some counterplay, some purchase on the white pawn structure. I'm pretty sure that castles was the right move here. And then f6 would be the follow-up. This would be a decent way to get counterplay. But c4, well, this gives white something of a free hand. Black's intention was to go f6, but after e takes f6, g takes f6, white now has a very promising position. And I think Felgeier misses a little trick here. I think by far his best move here would have been e4, opening up the position in the centre. And if rook g8, just knight d2. And now white is certainly better. Well, black probably has to castle on the queen side, then white can get to work straight away, opening up the position with b3. It's my impression that in this opposite colour bishop middle game, white will have the initiative based on his ability to leave open the position more quickly than black can. But in the game, well, Felgeier played the natural move, king h1. I mean, we can understand that move. He's just anticipating black's idea of rook g8 or maybe h5. Huska castled on the queen side, and now the not so surprising move, b3. C takes b3, but of course black can delay this capture by playing knight a5, but after knight d2 it's going to come to the same. White protects g4 and he forces the pace on the queen side. Black's going to have to capture on b3 sooner rather than later, and really she doesn't want a knight on a5 in a position like that. So she takes straight away and plays her queen to c7. b4. Well, self-explanatory. Black takes on b4, and now white plays queen a4. So he's even willing to sacrifice a pawn here to open up lines against the black king. I mean, that's perfectly logical. As I say, the initiative is of key importance in opposite colour bishop middle games. And for the pawn, white has an obvious attack, swinging the rook across to b1, after which black defends with rook to d6. Bishop b5, rook g8, and now g5. Interesting positional move here. Closing the file should black take on g5, and at the same time gaining control over e5. Probably after f takes g5, knight e5 would get the knight on c6 out of the way, and then a route will be opened down to a7. Black has got to be extremely careful in this position. Well, for the time being, black defends properly with h6. This is an interesting move, and Felguy takes on h6. If he'd taken on c6, and then taken on f6, and then taken on a7, rook takes c3 would have been the continuation. And although white's got play for the pawn, there's nothing concrete, no obvious plan to further his attack in this particular position, given that queen a8 check will be answered by queen b8. So Felguy defers that sequence, preferring to play g takes h6, re-establishing material equality and forcing black to think about the passed h-pawn, which is exactly what José does with rook h8. Bishop takes c6, rook takes c6, queen takes a7. It's a little bit different this time. White has slightly more time because black's got to actually spend a bit of time mopping up the h-pawn, and white uses that time to bring his rook onto the open g-file. Now threats are mounting on both sides of the board, and rook g7 or rook g8 check are definite threats that black has to beware of. Well, perhaps José should play rook h8 in this position, but she comes out with rook takes c3 and runs slap bang into queen a8 check. Obviously now queen b8 is answered by rook g8 check, winning material. So king d7 was played, and now rook gb1. It really is a different story, because suddenly the attack on b7 is very difficult to meet. King d6, is this the best that José can do? Apparently so. Her idea is that after rook takes b7, she's going rook c1 check. Obviously white takes this and plays knight g1, and now her further idea is to try and get a perpetual check after rook takes h2 check. Going back, white sets that threats are so strong against the black king in this position that really she has no choice, no checks with the queen, so she's got to try and scramble something after the rook check. But to be honest, it simply doesn't work. The white king runs up the board, runs back, and after king e1, the checks are out. Once the checks finish, white is going to cash in on his earlier fine play. So black resigned. An unclear game all the way through, but a game with some interesting and original twists, and another confirmation that knight e2 is well worth playing.